Hello and welcome to this video on cardiovascular disease, and this is related to diseases of the heart itself as well as the blood vessels. So the heart is a fantastic organ, it pumps blood around the entire body, but in order to do that effectively it will need to have a very rich blood supply itself, delivering the oxygen and glucose necessary for the respiration required to release the energy needed to pump that blood. So here you can see some blood vessels on the outside of the heart itself. These are the coronary vessels, and the ones that are actually supplying oxygenated blood to the heart muscle cells are the coronary arteries. One type of cardiovascular disease that is associated with the blood vessels is called coronary heart disease, and it's when these blood vessels actually become blocked or narrowed. So in this sketch we're looking at an artery that's nice and clear. However, it's very common due to diet and lifestyle and other factors for these arteries to become blocked with fatty deposits, and as a result the artery effectively gets narrowed. That means less blood actually gets delivered to the heart muscle cells and less oxygen gets delivered there, and this could eventually lead to a heart attack, so it's a major issue. One effective way of treating this is to actually insert a wire mesh, which is also called a stent. These get inserted through the blood vessels of the patient along with a balloon, and that balloon is then inflated, pushing against the wire mesh or the stent, widening it, and that effectively widens the artery and squashes the fatty deposits. The balloon then gets deflated and removed from the body, but because the wire mesh is made from a memory-shaped polymer, it stays extended and it keeps that blood vessel open to allow blood to flow freely. However, by placing this in the blood vessel, there is an obstacle now that blood has to flow through, and platelets, when they come into contact with an obstacle, would start to kind of accumulate at that obstacle and could form a blood clot, and again that could be a serious issue. And this risk of a blood clot forming near the stent is also known as thrombosis. So a patient that has received a stent as a form of treatment will also have to take anticoagulation drugs for the remainder of their life to stop the blood from clotting. There are some recent developments in stents that actually allow the stent itself to release chemicals that can stop the blood from clotting. So another form of effective treatment, which is necessary if the blood vessels are so severely damaged by these fatty deposits and a stent simply won't work, is to have a bypass. And here the blood is rerouted around this blockage, and that has to be done through surgery. So there's a major risk procedure, but one that could ultimately save somebody's life. So what causes these fatty deposits? Well, one of those things is cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is an essential lipid that the body makes. It's made in the liver and it's needed for the cell membranes of the cells in the body and also to make some steroid hormones. It is transported in the blood to where it is needed, but if there's too much cholesterol being transported by the blood, the excess can get deposited and contribute to these fatty deposits or plaques forming in the blood vessels themselves. Poor diet, lack of exercise, and genetics can increase what we call bad cholesterol or LDL cholesterol levels in the blood, leading to these fatty deposits which narrow the coronary arteries. And when this happens, a patient has coronary heart disease and may need to have a stent or a bypass form of treatment to prevent heart attacks. So in essence, it's important to prevent the need for a stent or a bypass. And the preventative medication that can be prescribed by doctors are a group of medications called statins. These work by lowering the cholesterol production by the liver. But they are not a miracle cure. They do have side effects, and some really nasty side effects, in that they could lead to kidney and liver damage. So the pros and cons of taking them really do need to be weighed up. They need to be taken regularly to be effective, and that relies on the patient remembering to take them in the first place. So that covers coronary heart disease, but what about other forms of cardiovascular disease? And these could be linked to the pacemaker in the heart, the valves of the heart itself, and also blood loss is a massive issue for the body. So what treatment is available and what are the risks of those treatments? If we take blood loss in the first instance, this normally happens during a severe injury. Now, the heart can actually still pump the remaining blood cells around the body as long as the volume of blood is topped up. A treatment for this is to inject the body with a saline fluid as this top-up, but it's important to remove any air bubbles because they could lead to problems as well. And that gives the body enough time to make some new blood cells. However, if the blood loss is really severe, then a blood transfusion is necessary, and that relies on there being donated blood that is a close tissue match to the patient. Now, every single heart has its rhythm set by its pacemaker, and this is essentially a group of very specialised cells in the right atrium that are designed to generate their own electrical impulses to cause the heart muscle to contract. When you do exercise, the pacemaker resets to a higher level so that you can actually pump blood much faster, and when you don't need to have your heart pumping that much, your body and your pacemaker readjust. If that pacemaker goes out of sync, there are huge implications for the body. So an artificial device that actually has electrodes wired up to the heart itself that acts to mimic this pacemaker is a form of treatment. And once in place, people can actually get on and live a relatively normal life. They'll have to go to the doctor for regular checkups, but in essence, it's quite a good procedure. The heart valves, on the other hand, may stop working effectively, and this could lead to much more severe issues, and that then leads to a more invasive form of treatment and higher risks. So as you age, and again I guess diet and lifestyle have an influence on this, the tissue that the valves in the heart are made of can actually stiffen. When this happens, the valves do not close properly, and it's essential that they close to prevent the backflow of blood. So blood does flow the wrong way, and that makes the heart as a pump less efficient. So in terms of treatment, the valves can be replaced by those from a living organism, and in this case it's called a biological transplant. If it's a human valve, it's from someone who is on the organ donor list who happens to have a relatively close tissue match to the patient. This is quite rare, and in the event of a successful transplant, the body of the patient will try and reject that, and to compensate for that rejection, the patient needs to take immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of their life, leaving themselves more vulnerable to other infections. The organ itself could come from an animal, often a pig, but again you have the same kind of rejection issues. Mechanical valves can be put into a heart instead. These are made from non-biological materials such as titanium, which is a very light metal, or polymers. They last a lot longer than biological valves do, but there's a slightly higher risk of blood clots forming with these sorts of valves than with biological valves, so the patient will need to take anticoagulant medication for the rest of their life. If the heart itself completely fails, then a heart transplant will be necessary. Finding a donor is very difficult, and sometimes it's not just the heart that will need to be replaced, the lungs could be very severely damaged as well, so you need to have like a dual heart and lung transplant. So here you're relying on a donor, so the availability isn't going to be that easy. And equally, there is that rejection issue as well. Artificial hearts have been engineered, unfortunately don't have longevity. People who have had artificial hearts put in place do so only to lengthen the period of time that they can survive whilst waiting for a heart transplant from a biological donor. In order to operate the machine that is the artificial heart, a lot of power is necessary. And up until relatively recently, it's been the case that the patient who's received an artificial heart will have to stay in hospital for that entire duration and wired up to a device that can power the artificial heart itself. I say recently because there has been a couple of instances where an artificial heart has been designed where the power supply for that heart can actually be carried around by the patient in a backpack, allowing that patient to leave hospital and go about a relatively normal life whilst they're waiting for their heart transplant. So that covers cardiovascular disease. Make sure that you appreciate all the different aspects of cardiovascular disease, how each aspect is treated, and to be able to evaluate the risks associated with those treatments. Do check in again soon, and thanks for watching.